I want to talk to the woman who stopped believing in fairy tales but never stopped praying. You know who you are. You've seen the distance between what love promised and what love delivered. You felt the ache of waiting for something real while the world kept selling you fantasy. And somewhere along the way, you made a choice. You stopped chasing the castle. You stopped believing that someone would ride in and fix everything. But you didn't stop believing in something higher. You didn't stop trusting that there's a design to all of this, a timing, a purpose, a reason you haven't met him yet. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And if you're reading this, I think you already know what I'm about to say. Real love doesn't look like the movies. It looks like two people who've been through fire, still choosing each other, still building, still believing, not in magic, but in something stronger. Divine timing, honest connection, and the kind of faith that survives disappointment. I used to think love was supposed to feel like lightning, instant, undeniable, the kind of thing that hits you so hard you don't have time to question it. And maybe when I was younger, that's what I was chasing. Someone who would walk into the room and change everything. Someone who would prove that all the waiting, all the loneliness, all the nights wondering if I was asking for too much, that it all meant something. But that's not what happened. What happened instead was quieter, slower, and honestly, more painful than I expected. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about fairy tales. They end right when real life begins. The prince shows up, the music swells, the credits roll, but they never show you what happens after the castle. They never show you the mornings when he's distant, the arguments that don't resolve in 3 minutes, the moments when you realize that love isn't a feeling that saves you, it's a choice you make when the feeling fades, and that's when the fairy tale dies. Not with a villain, not with betrayal, just with reality. The slow, uncomfortable realization that the story you were sold doesn't match the life you're living. And I think that's where you are right now. You've been through enough relationships to know that butterflies don't build a foundation. You've seen what happens when two people mistake chemistry for compatibility. You've watched friends get married because the timing felt right, not because the person was right. And you made a decision. You stopped chasing the fantasy. You stopped waiting for someone to complete you. You started building a life that didn't need saving. That takes strength. That takes faith. Not the kind of faith that expects a miracle, the kind that trusts the process even when the process feels endless. But here's what nobody told me. Letting go of the fairy tale doesn't mean you stop wanting love. It just means you stop wanting the wrong version of it. You start wanting something real, something that doesn't require a perfect meet cute or a dramatic gesture, something that feels like coming home after a long day. And that shift from fantasy to reality, it changes everything. Because now you're not looking for someone to rescue you. You're looking for someone to build with. Someone who sees you, not the version of you that you present to the world, but the version that exists at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep because your mind won't stop running. The version that still prays even when you're not sure anyone's listening. I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to sit in the quiet and wonder if you're asking for two. Wait before you scroll. Hear this. You didn't stop believing in fairy tales because you gave up. You stopped believing in them because you grew up. And growth always feels like loss at first. You mourn the version of love you thought you'd have, the wedding you imagined, the proposal that would make everyone cry, the story that would sound perfect when you told it at dinner parties. But here's the thing about mourning. It clears space. It makes room for something deeper, something that doesn't need an audience to be real. And that's where God comes in, not as a replacement for love, not as a consolation prize, but as the foundation. Because when you stop believing in fairy tales, you start believing in something that doesn't break under pressure. You start believing in timing that makes sense only in hindsight. You start believing that the right person isn't the one who shows up when you want them to. It's the one who shows up when you're ready, when you've done the work, when you've built a life that doesn't collapse the moment someone walks away.
I've seen this happen. I've watched people who spent years chasing the wrong person finally meet the right one, not because they prayed harder, but because they stopped forcing it. They stopped trying to make someone fit who was never meant to stay. They stopped confusing loneliness with love. And when they finally met someone who matched their energy, their values, their vision, it didn't feel like lightning. It felt like recognition, like their soul had been waiting for this exact person. And now that they were here, everything finally made sense.
That's what I want you to understand. The absence of fairy tales doesn't mean the absence of magic. It just means the magic looks different. It's quieter. It's steadier. It's the kind of thing you don't post about because it's too sacred to perform. It's the kind of love that doesn't need validation because it validates itself. And if you're sitting here reading this, wondering if that kind of love even exists, I'm telling you it does. I've seen it. I've felt it. And I know you're closer to it than you think. Because here's what I believe. I believe that every disappointment you've survived was preparing you for something you're not ready to see yet. I believe that the person who walked away wasn't wrong. They just weren't yours. I believe that the nights you spent crying, questioning, wondering if you'd ever feel love the way you deserve, those nights were teaching you what you actually need. Not what looks good, not what sounds romantic, but what feels right when no one else is watching. And that's the shift. From performance to presence, from fantasy to faith, from waiting for someone to save you to building something worth sharing. That's the love that lasts. That's the love that survives the hard conversations, the silent mornings, the moments when you look at each other and realize you're not perfect, but you're committed. You're here. You're choosing this. And that choice, made again and again, every single day, that's what fairy tales can't teach you. So if you're reading this and you feel like you're behind, like everyone else figured it out, and you're still waiting, you're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. You're learning the difference between infatuation and intimacy, between chemistry and commitment, between someone who makes you feel alive and someone who makes you feel safe. And that distinction matters because when you finally meet someone who offers both, someone who ignites your soul and steadies your spirit, you'll know. Not because it feels like a movie, but because it feels like home. There's a difference between waiting and preparing, and I think you figured that out already. Waiting is passive. It's sitting by the window hoping someone notices you. It's refreshing your phone. It's wondering why everyone else seems to find it so easily while you're still here, still alone, still praying for something you can't even name anymore. But preparing, that's different. Preparing is active. It's building a life so full, so purposeful, so aligned with who you actually are, that when he finally shows up, he doesn't complete you. He complements you. And that distinction changes everything. Because I think you know this already. You've done the work. You've spent the nights journaling, praying, asking God why it's taking so long. You've read the books. You've gone to therapy. You've learned how to be alone without being lonely. You've built a career, friendships, routines that don't revolve around someone else's validation. And somewhere in that process, you stopped needing love to fix you. You started wanting love to amplify you, to meet you where you are and build something neither of you could create alone. That's spiritual maturity. That's what happens when you stop asking God for a person and start asking Him to prepare you for the person. Because the truth is, most people aren't ready for the love they pray for. They want the connection without the vulnerability. They want the intimacy without the honesty. They want someone to see them fully, but only show their highlight reel. And that doesn't work. Real love requires real presence. It requires you to show up as you are, unfiltered, unpolished, unafraid of being seen. And that terrifies most people. But not you. You've been through enough to know that pretending doesn't protect you, it isolates you. You've tried being the version of yourself you thought someone would want, and it left you emptier than being alone ever did. So you made a choice. You decided that the next person who gets access to your life has to earn it. Not with grand gestures, not with perfect timing, but with consistency, with presence, with the kind of love that doesn't perform, it persists. But here's what nobody told me. Even when you know what you want, waiting for it still hurts. Even when you trust the timing, the silence still feels heavy. Even when you believe in divine design, there are nights when you lie awake wondering if you missed something, if you're too picky, if you're asking for too much, if maybe you should just settle for someone who's good enough instead of holding out for someone who feels right. And in those moments, the doubt creeps in. Not loud, not dramatic, just a whisper, a question, a crack in the foundation you've been building. And that's when faith becomes real. Not when everything makes sense, not when the answer arrives right on time, but when you choose to believe anyway. When you choose to trust that the waiting isn't wasted, that the loneliness is teaching you something you'll need later, that every person who walked away made space for the one who'll stay. That's not blind optimism. That's spiritual endurance. That's the kind of faith that survives disappointment because it's rooted in something deeper than circumstance. I think about it like this. Imagine a candle in a cathedral. The room is massive. The ceiling stretches so high you can barely see it. The walls echo every sound. And in the center of all that space, there's one small flame, alone, flickering, barely visible from a distance. But it's still burning. It doesn't need the cathedral to be smaller. It doesn't need validation from the other candles. It just exists, steady, patient, trusting that its light matters even when it feels insignificant. That's you. You're the candle. And the cathedral is the waiting, the vastness, the silence, the uncertainty. And every time you choose faith over fear, every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you choose to keep building your life instead of pausing it for someone else, you're keeping that flame alive. You're proving that your light doesn't depend on being seen, it depends on being true. And when he finally shows up, the one who's been preparing for you the same way you've been preparing for him, he won't blow out your flame. He'll light his candle from yours. And together, you'll illuminate that entire cathedral. Not because you needed each other to exist, but because you chose each other anyway. That's what realistic love looks like. It's not Romeo and Juliet dying for each other in 3 days. It's two people who've lived full lives independently deciding to build something better together. It's not neediness disguised as romance. It's partnership grounded in mutual respect. It's not someone completing your sentence because they know you so well. It's someone listening to your entire story because they want to understand you fully. It's not perfect, it's not easy, but it's real. And real always outlasts fantasy. I know you've been let down before. I know you've given your heart to people who didn't protect it. I know you've stayed longer than you should have because you wanted to believe they'd change. I know you've prayed for clarity and gotten silence. I know you've wondered if maybe you're unlovable, if maybe there's something fundamentally broken in you that keeps pushing people away. And I need you to hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not unlovable. You are not broken. You are being refined. And refinement always feels like rejection at first. The gold doesn't know it's being purified. It just knows it's burning. But every impurity that gets stripped away makes it stronger, makes it worth more, makes it ready for what it was always meant to become. And you're in that fire right now. It hurts. It's isolating. It's exhausting. But it's not punishment. It's preparation. And that's the part fairy tales never show you. They never show the years between the curse and the kiss. They never show the loneliness that taught you self-sufficiency. They never show the heartbreak that taught you boundaries. They never show the nights you questioned everything but still woke up and chose faith. They just show the ending, the moment it all clicks, the happily ever after. But you're living the in-between, the part where the story is still being written. And I know it's hard. I know it feels like everyone else got the shortcut, while you're stuck on the long road. But here's what I've learned. The long road builds something the shortcut never could. It builds character, discernment, depth, the ability to recognize real love when it finally shows up, because you've survived everything that wasn't. And when you meet him, when you look across the table and realize this is different, this is real, this is what you've been preparing for, you won't wish it happened sooner. You'll be grateful it happened now. When you're ready, when he's ready, when the timing is finally, beautifully, divinely right. I need to tell you something about spiritual connection that nobody talks about. It's not what you think it is. It's not matching Bible verses. It's not praying together before bed. It's not even sharing the same beliefs about God. Those things matter, sure. But spiritual connection runs deeper than ritual. It's about recognizing the same truth in each other's eyes. It's about sitting in silence and feeling the presence of something bigger than both of you. It's about knowing that when life breaks you, and it will break you, this person won't just hold your hand. They'll hold your faith when you can't hold it yourself. Because real love doesn't just ask if you believe in God. It asks if you believe in growth, if you believe that people can change, If you believe that two imperfect humans can create something sacred just by choosing each other every single day. And that requires a different kind of faith. Not the kind that shows up on Sundays, the kind that shows up on Tuesday night when you're both exhausted and the conversation gets hard, and walking away would be easier than working through it. That's when spiritual connection matters. When the romantic feeling fades and all you have left is commitment and the quiet belief that this is where you're supposed to be. I think you understand this already. You've seen relationships that looked perfect on the surface, but had no foundation underneath. You've watched people post about their love while privately falling apart. You've learned that connection isn't about how it looks to everyone else. It's about how it feels when it's just the two of you. When there's no audience, no performance, just two souls trying to figure out how to love each other well. And that vulnerability, that willingness to be fully seen, that's where God lives. Not in the polished version you present to the world. In the messy, honest, imperfect version you reveal to one person. And here's what I've learned. You can't build that kind of connection with someone who's still performing. You can't be vulnerable with someone who's afraid of their own depth. You can't grow with someone who thinks they've already arrived. You need someone who's still becoming. Someone who knows they're flawed and doesn't pretend otherwise. Someone who's done enough work on themselves to recognize when they're projecting, when they're defending, when they're repeating old patterns. Someone who chooses growth over comfort, truth over ego, partnership over control. But here's what nobody told me. Finding that person requires you to become that person first. You can't demand emotional honesty if you're still hiding parts of yourself. You can't expect spiritual depth if you're skimming the surface of your own faith. You can't ask someone to meet you in vulnerability if you're still protecting yourself with walls. And that's the work. That's what the waiting has been teaching you. Not patience, presence. The ability to sit with your own discomfort long enough to transform it. The courage to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The humility to admit that maybe you're not ready yet either. And that realization doesn't feel like progress. It feels like failure. It feels like admitting that all this time you've been waiting for someone else to show up, you should have been showing up for yourself. But that's not failure. That's awakening. That's the moment when you stop looking for someone to save you and start building a life worth inviting someone into. That's when everything changes. Because now you're not seeking completion. You're seeking companionship. You're not looking for someone to fill the void. You're looking for someone to walk beside you while you both keep growing. I think about relationships like orbit. Two celestial bodies circling each other. They have their own gravity, their own pull, their own light. And when they come together, they don't merge into one. They create a system, a balance, a dance where both maintain their identity while building something neither could create alone. That's what you're looking for, not someone who absorbs you, someone who orbits with you, someone whose presence makes you more yourself, not less. And finding that person requires you to know yourself first, to understand your own patterns, your triggers, the ways you sabotage connection because intimacy terrifies you more than loneliness, the stories you tell yourself about why you're still alone, the beliefs you carry about love that you inherited from your parents, from past relationships, from a world that taught you that needing someone makes you weak. Those beliefs are lies, and until you unlearn them, you'll keep attracting the wrong people. Not because you're broken, because you're still operating from an outdated version of yourself. So let me ask you this. Who are you when no one's watching? Not the version you post online, not the version your friends see, the version that exists at midnight when you can't sleep, the version that still has questions you're afraid to ask out loud, the version that wonders if maybe you're asking for too much, if maybe realistic love means lowering your standards, if maybe you should just be grateful someone wants you at all. That version, the one you hide, that's the version that needs healing. Because until you love that version of yourself, you'll keep looking for someone else to do it for you. And that's not love. That's dependency disguised as devotion. Real love doesn't rescue you from yourself. It reflects you back to yourself so clearly that you can't hide anymore. It shows you your patterns, your wounds, the places where you're still carrying pain from people who left years ago. And instead of running from that reflection, you lean into it. You do the work. You heal the parts of yourself that keep recreating the same story with different people. And that process, that painful, uncomfortable, essential process, that's what prepares you for the kind of love you're praying for. Because here's the truth. The right person won't fix you. They'll challenge you. They'll call you out when you're being defensive. They'll hold you accountable when you're avoiding something. They'll love you enough to let you feel your own discomfort instead of rushing in to make it better. And at first, that won't feel like love. It'll feel like pressure, like they're asking too much, like maybe they don't accept you as you are. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is they see your potential and they refuse to let you settle for anything less than who you're capable of becoming. And that kind of love requires trust, not the shallow kind, the deep kind, the kind that says, I see your worst and I'm still here, the kind that survives the arguments, the misunderstandings, the moments when you both want to walk away but choose to stay instead, the kind that doesn't need certainty because it's rooted in commitment. And commitment isn't a feeling, it's a decision. A daily choice to keep showing up even when it's hard, even when the initial excitement fades, even when you realize that loving someone well is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But it's also the most meaningful, because when you finally find someone who meets you in that depth, who matches your faith, your vision, your willingness to grow, everything you survived to get there makes sense. Every disappointment, every heartbreak, every night you wondered if it would ever happen, it all becomes part of the story. Not the tragedy, the preparation, the refining, the journey that made you ready for what you're about to receive. And I know you're tired. I know the waiting feels endless. I know there are days when you wonder if maybe you missed your chance, if maybe the timing is off, if maybe you're supposed to do this alone. But I need you to hear this clearly. You haven't missed anything. The timing isn't off, and you're not doing this alone. God is in the waiting. He's in the silence. He's in the moments when you choose faith over fear, and He's preparing something for you that you can't see yet, something that will make every moment of loneliness worth it. Let me tell you what I've learned about divine timing. It's not what most people think. Most people think divine timing means everything happens when it's supposed to, that God has a perfect schedule, and you just have to wait for your turn. But that's not how it works. Divine timing isn't about the calendar. It's about readiness. It's about two people reaching the same level of emotional maturity at the same moment. And that can't be forced. It can't be rushed. It can only be trusted. Because here's what I know. You can meet the right person at the wrong time, and it will feel like torture. You'll recognize something in them, something that feels like home, something that makes you think, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. But if you're not ready, if they're not ready, if the timing is off by even a fraction, it won't work. And it's not because the connection wasn't real. It's because real connection without readiness is just potential. And potential without execution is just pain. I've seen this happen. I've watched people meet someone perfect for them and walk away because they weren't healed yet. I've watched people force relationships that had all the right ingredients, but none of the right timing. I've watched people hold on too long because they confused recognition with destiny. And I've learned that recognizing someone is just the beginning. The real work is becoming someone they can recognize too. Someone who matches their energy, their growth, their vision. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the quiet moments when you're not thinking about them at all, when you're just living, building, growing, becoming. And that's the part that feels unfair. You want to be ready now. You want them to show up now. You want the waiting to be over. But growth doesn't care about your timeline. It cares about your transformation. And transformation requires time, space, solitude, the kind of deep internal work that only happens when you're not distracted by someone else's presence, when you're forced to sit with yourself and face the questions you've been avoiding, when you're stripped of all the external validation and left with nothing but your own reflection. That's where the real change happens, not in the relationship, before the relationship, in the preparation, in the becoming, in the moments when you choose yourself even when it feels lonely, when you set boundaries even when it costs you connection, when you walk away from almost right because you trust that fully right is still coming. Those moments, those choices. That's what divine timing is built on, not fate, faith. The willingness to believe that what's meant for you won't pass you by, but it also won't arrive before you're capable of keeping it. And here's the thing about that belief. It requires you to stop controlling the outcome, to stop forcing doors open, to stop convincing people to choose you, to stop performing for love and start trusting that the right love won't require a performance. And that surrender, that release of control, That's terrifying for most people because control feels like safety. Letting go feels like falling. But here's what I've learned. The only thing more painful than letting go is holding on to something that was never meant to stay. You know this already. You've held on before. You've tried to make it work with someone who wasn't matching your effort. You've convinced yourself that if you just loved them harder, they'd finally see you. But that's not how it works. Love isn't a persuasion game, it's a recognition game. And the right person won't need convincing. They'll see you and know, not because you're perfect, because you're aligned, because your values match, your vision overlaps, your growth trajectories point in the same direction. And when that happens, it doesn't feel like work, it feels like relief. But here's what nobody told me. Even when you trust divine timing, waiting still tests you. It tests your faith, your patience, your ability to stay grounded when everyone around you seems to be moving forward. It tests whether you actually believe what you say you believe, whether you trust God's timing or just tolerate it, whether you're building a life you love or just killing time until someone shows up to make it meaningful. And that test, that long, quiet, lonely test, that's where most people fail. Not because they lose faith, because they lose themselves. They forget who they were before they started waiting. They forget that the goal isn't to be chosen, it's to be whole. And wholeness doesn't come from another person, it comes from you, from doing the internal work, from healing the childhood wounds that make you seek validation in all the wrong places, from understanding why you're attracted to emotionally unavailable people, from learning how to self soothe instead of looking for someone else to regulate your emotions, from building a relationship with yourself that's so strong, so stable, so grounded that when someone walks into your life, they enhance it, they don't define it. That's the shift. From dependence to interdependence, from needing someone to choosing someone, from filling a void to building a partnership. And that shift changes the entire dynamic. Because now you're not bringing emptiness to the table, you're bringing wholeness. You're not asking them to complete you, you're inviting them to grow with you. And that invitation, that offer of partnership instead of rescue, that's what attracts the right kind of person. The kind who's done their own work, who knows their own worth, who doesn't need you, but wants you anyway. I think about it like this. Imagine two trees growing on opposite sides of a field, separate, independent, rooted in their own soil. And over time, as they grow, their branches reach toward each other. Not because they need support, because they're strong enough to extend, and eventually those branches intertwine, not merging, not losing their individual shape, just connecting, creating shade where there was none, offering shelter to everything beneath them. That's what mature love looks like. Two whole people choosing to intertwine, not out of necessity, out of desire, out of the belief that together they can create something more beautiful than they could alone. And if you're sitting here wondering when that's going to happen for you, I want you to consider this. What if it's not about when? What if it's about who you're becoming in the meantime? What if every day you spend working on yourself, setting boundaries, choosing your own peace, what if all of that is making you into the exact person he's been praying for? What if while you've been asking God to send him, he's been asking God to prepare you? What if the timing feels long because the preparation is deep? What if the waiting isn't punishment, it's protection, protecting you from settling, protecting you from choosing someone out of loneliness instead of alignment, protecting you from building a life with someone who can't match your growth? Because here's what I believe. I believe that every person who didn't choose you was protecting the space for the one who will. I believe that every relationship that ended was teaching you what you actually need versus what you thought you wanted. I believe that the loneliness you feel right now is making room for a connection so deep, so real, so aligned that everything before it will feel like practice. And I believe that when he finally shows up, when you meet the man who's been doing his own work, his own healing, his own preparation, you won't wonder why it took so long. You'll understand that it took exactly as long as it needed to. And until then, your job isn't to wait passively, it's to live actively, to build a life so full of purpose, passion, and presence that when he arrives, he's not walking into emptiness, he's walking into abundance. He's not completing your story, he's joining it. And together, you'll write something neither of you could have written alone. Not a fairy tale, something better, something real, something that survives the hard days because it's built on faith, not fantasy, on commitment, not chemistry, on the quiet, unshakable belief that what God has joined together, not even you can tear apart. I want to leave you with something you can hold on to. something that doesn't require you to have all the answers, something that lets you breathe in the uncertainty and trust that you're exactly where you need to be. Because I think the hardest part of this journey isn't the waiting, it's the wondering. Wondering if you're doing it right, if you're missing signs, if maybe you're supposed to compromise, if the love you're holding out for even exists. And in those moments of doubt, I need you to remember this. You are not behind, you are not forgotten. You're not asking for too much. You are being prepared for something most people will never experience because they gave up before the refining was finished. They chose comfort over growth. They chose certainty over faith. They chose someone who was available over someone who was aligned. And there's no judgment in that. But that's not your path. Your path requires something deeper, something that can't be rushed or replicated or found on any app. It requires you to trust that the right love will feel different because you're different now. You're not the person you were when this journey started. And that's the whole point. Because transformation doesn't happen in the relationship, it happens in the becoming. In the nights you chose yourself, in the moments you set boundaries and lost people because of it, in the mornings you woke up alone and still chose gratitude, in the prayers that felt unanswered but kept you grounded anyway. That's the transformation. That's what makes you ready for the kind of love that doesn't break under pressure, the kind that deepens instead of diminishes, the kind that looks at you on your worst day and says, I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere, we're going to figure this out together. And when you meet him, when you finally encounter the man who's done his own work, who's survived his own disappointments, who's learned the same lessons in a different classroom, it won't feel like magic. It'll feel like recognition. Like your soul has been searching for this exact frequency, and now that it's here, everything finally makes sense. You won't need to explain yourself, you won't need to perform, you won't need to convince him of your worth because he'll already see it. Not because you're perfect, because you're true. Because you've done the work to become someone who doesn't hide anymore. Someone who shows up fully. Someone who knows that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the only path to real connection. But here's what I need you to understand. That moment of recognition isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because meeting the right person is just the first step. Building a life with them is the real work. And that work will test everything you think you know about love. It'll expose your wounds, your patterns, the places where you're still operating from fear instead of faith. And instead of running from that exposure, you'll have to lean into it. You'll have to let him see the parts of yourself you've spent years protecting. You'll have to trust that he won't use your vulnerability against you. And that trust, that deep, uncomfortable, essential trust, that's what turns recognition into partnership. And partnership isn't about being the same, it's about being complementary. It's about two people with different strengths choosing to build something that requires both. It's about knowing when to lead and when to follow, when to speak and when to listen, when to push and when to let go. It's a dance. And like any dance, it requires practice, patience, the willingness to step on each other's toes and laugh about it instead of walking off the floor. That's realistic love, not the absence of conflict, the ability to navigate conflict without destroying the connection. And here's what nobody told me. The relationships that last aren't the ones that feel easy. They're the ones where both people are committed to the growth, where both people understand that love isn't a feeling you fall into, it's a practice you commit to, where both people show up even when it's hard, even when the initial excitement fades, even when you're staring at each other across the table, wondering how you got here, and if you can make it through this. That's when love becomes real. When it stops being about how the other person makes you feel and starts being about who you're both becoming together. And I know that sounds less romantic than the fairy tale. I know it sounds like work. But here's the truth. The fairy tale is a lie. It promises you a feeling that fades. Realistic love promises you a foundation that lasts. It promises you someone who won't leave when things get hard, someone who sees your darkness and doesn't run, someone who knows you're not perfect and loves you not despite your flaws but because of your wholeness, flaws included. That's the love worth waiting for. That's the love that survives decades. That's the love that looks back on the waiting and understands why it had to take this long. Because you needed time to become this version of yourself. The version that doesn't settle. The version that knows her worth. The version that can sit in a cathedral alone, holding a single flame, trusting that her light matters even when no one's watching. And when he walks into that cathedral and lights his candle from yours, you won't lose yourself in his presence. You'll expand. You'll grow brighter. You'll create something together that neither of you could have created alone. Not because you needed each other, because you chose each other. And that choice, that daily intentional sacred choice, that's what keeps love alive. Not chemistry, not compatibility, not even shared beliefs, but the decision to keep showing up, to keep choosing growth over comfort, to keep choosing partnership over pride, to keep choosing each other even when it would be easier to walk away. That's the love that reflects God. Not perfect, not effortless, but committed, covenant. The kind of love that says, I see all of you and I'm still here. I know this is hard and I'm not leaving. I believe in what we're building and I'm willing to do the work. So if you're sitting here right now, still waiting, still wondering, still trusting that He's coming, I want you to know something. Your faith is not in vain. Your prayers are not unheard. Your preparation is not unnoticed. And the love you're holding space for is already on its way. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but it's coming. And when it arrives, it will be worth every moment of loneliness, every tear, every prayer, every night you chose faith over fear. Because you didn't just wait, you became, you transformed, you refined yourself into someone capable of receiving the very thing you've been asking for. And until that day comes, I want you to live. Not halfway, not in pause mode, not waiting by the window for someone to notice you, but fully, wildly, unapologetically. Build the life you want. Chase the dreams that scare you. Create the art that lives inside you. Serve the purpose that calls you. Love the people around you. Show up for yourself with the same devotion you'd show up for Him. Because when He finally arrives, you don't want to hand Him an empty vessel and ask Him to fill it. You want to offer Him abundance and invite Him to add to it. That's the invitation. Not rescue, partnership, not completion, companionship. Not someone to make you whole, someone to walk beside you while you both keep becoming. And that invitation, extended from a place of wholeness instead of need, that's what attracts the kind of love that lasts, the kind that survives the storms, the kind that grows deeper with time, the kind that looks back on the fairy tale and laughs because what you built together is so much better than anything you could have imagined. So here's my blessing for you. May you find peace in the waiting. May you trust the timing even when it tests you. May you become the person you've been praying for. May you recognize Him when He arrives. And may the love you build together be rooted not in fantasy, but in faith. Not in performance, but in presence. Not in what it looks like to everyone else, but in what it feels like when it's just the two of you, sitting in silence, knowing that this imperfect, intentional, sacred partnership, this is what you were always meant to find. You're closer than you think. Keep the flame burning.